Good morning, everyone. We're just going to let attendees get in here. We'll just give it a quick minute before we get started. Just welcome to everybody. Happy Friday morning. Right. Just let a few more people in here. Okay. Let's see. All right, we can probably get started on just the basics as everyone comes in. Good morning, everyone. This is Sonia at Mettle Health, and today's discussion is going to be on just thinking about the end of life, and we're going to talk a little bit about hospice as well, and of course, answer your questions. We are lucky enough today to have Bridget and Ladybird hosting this conversation for us, so I'm hoping Bridget, Ladybird, you can just do a quick introduction of yourself before we get started.
Yeah, hi, I'm Bridget, and I'm a mental health counselor and clinical social worker.
Hi, and I'm Ladybird. I am a mental health counselor and RN and social worker.
Short and sweet. You guys are so awesome. Okay. So important note that we always like to say during these discussions is, we're going to talk about sensitive topics that may feel a little bit difficult or emotionally raw. And we want this to be a safe space for everyone. So please feel free to share. This is meant to be supportive from us. We hope you'll get support from your fellow attendees as well, but just please know that this is meant to be helpful. And one of the two ways that you can interact with us while we're going through these topics is you can raise your hand and ask your question verbally and, kind of have a bit of a dialogue with Ladybird and Bridget. Or if you prefer not to do that, you can type your question into the Q&A area and I can read it out loud for you. So again, you can raise your hand, ask it out loud, or you can type it in. And of course, if you prefer to remain anonymous, please just let me know when you ask it in the Q&A box and we will absolutely honor that. Again, safety is one of the more important things here. So again, Bridget, Ladybird are going to go through just kind of some level setting topics. If a question comes up during one of those topics that you want to ask, please go ahead. We're happy to kind of interrupt the slides and address one of your questions that makes sense for the topic that they're discussing. And then we'll keep going and do a Q&A at the end as well. Thanks again for being here, everyone.
Thanks, Sonia.
Thanks, Sonia. So we're so happy to be here with you today. And just to echo a few things that Sonia said, I think my experience of these conversations so far is just that there's so much richness and so much beauty in what you all bring in the support of one another, in the vulnerability and realness of your questions and reflections. So as always, that is so welcome and held. Also, just a quick note on the sort of the topic of end of life, which is that this is huge. And Ladybird and I are going to do our best to talk about really sort of a few things under this huge umbrella of transition. But we might not touch on what's on your mind. And so please feel free to bring that. And we might not touch on it from a perspective that feels resonant to you, and that is okay and possible, and links right to sort of defining what you need, because this is a very individual path. There isn't a right way, there isn't a wrong way. Everybody needs and wants different things when thinking about their end of life path or the end of life experience for someone that they care about or someone that's in their community or circle. It sort of all exists and is all true. And so we'll do our best, our humble best, to kind of try and hold that. The other kind of footnote that we felt like was important to say is that for almost all of us, probably talking about end of life is somewhat anticipatory, right? Even if we have an illness and we are actually in that stage of our life, the actual dying or uh, passing part is anticipatory. And to think about these things ahead of time is not something that jives with everybody. If you're here, you're probably interested in doing that, but it feels important to note because not everybody is. It's not culturally relevant for everyone to be thinking about these things ahead of time. And we just want to make space for that too, because everybody brings all of their life context to this. Ladybird, do you have any other sort of
No, just so I just really appreciate the spaciousness that you're opening this conversation with, because there's so much territory to cover, and we'll probably say this, throughout the conversation, that there is no right way to die. So this is really not about like these are the things that you absolutely must be considering or thinking about. They're possibilities. It's a range of possibilities. So it's a gorgeous conversation to have, and it can sometimes be a little daunting also.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think hopefully what we'll get to do today is sort of define, highlight, talk about some of the things that exist in this space. And for you get to think about, oh, that feels important to me. That doesn't feel important to me, right? Sort of defining what is true for you. Like, oh, I need to have my logistics like locked down because that is what's going to allow me to tend to these other things. Or like, you know what? I don't care what happens with my body. I won't be here, but it's really important to me that we talk about X or we review Y. So at the very least, hopefully we'll sort of give you a sense of the things that are in the space for you to sort of reflect on, like, oh, this feels really important to me, or I hadn't thought about this and I actually have to tend to this, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to the next slide. Yeah. So end of life really includes all of the things, and in palliative care, we think of, biological, psychological, social, spiritual, existential. And those are all significant components of this era of life in this chapter. And, something that I appreciated about the way that this slide was crafted is that it's this concept of verses, which can really feel true. Like, oh, if I'm so busy in the logistics, I can't tend to the emotion. If I'm so big in the emotion, I kind of like, get the existential gets drowned out, or like the physical is so demanding or daunting that how do we create space for the other things? And I think, I don't know, Ladybird, you tell me, but for me, it feels really like these things are so interwoven and really can't be separated. And yet sometimes there's something that's like just so glaring and big that if you don't tend to it, then the other things can't happen. Yeah, it's that both and Western culture is so we're just so efficient at compartmentalizing things and having categories to deal with, and somehow imagining that those categories are actually separate from other things, and they inform the other areas of our lives. But yes, it's true. Sometimes like a specific task, like, oh my gosh, I need to deal with my passwords, which is a practical thing that is new to our reality of preparing for death and dying. That can be something to focus on. That is sort of like, oh yeah, I can mark that off my list. I have a list of my passwords. Whereas tending to something more stickier or messier, like a relationship that ended poorly that you never reconciled in your heart, feels like it's going to take a lot more energy and maybe require more support and more resources that you don't necessarily have to work with. So yeah, it's helpful to actually have categories in some ways, just to sort of know the landscape, and then to remember that those categories are all connected. And I sometimes talk with families when they're really trying to prepare and plan everything, and like having a baby, it's like,
and the baby will come,
Mhm.
the death will come. It's certainly nice to know that certain things are prepared and ready for yourself and for your loved ones. And if they're not, it will be figured out and everyone will find their way. And so there isn't this sort of, what I feel like right now in our culture is this management of our death and dying versus a curiosity
Mhm.
about it and attending to it. So I like to think of preparing for it more about tending to it. Like I'm going to tend to this experience that is quite profound and like the biggest experience that you're going to have in some ways, the last one you're going to have. And so yeah, so there are these areas that we think that we're doing a good job in or we're not so good at, or we start to judge ourselves and compare, and to really in this final act toward yourself, if you're thinking about this for yourself, to offer it with kindness, like, oh, I'm gonna meet my death with as much kindness and generosity as I can towards myself, and look at these areas, you know, what was my life like, what were my relationships like, what did I love. It can also be a beautiful experience. It doesn't have to be proof that you mastered your death. That makes
You know,
sense.
one of the things that comes to my mind when I hear you talk about kindness is also space for what maybe isn't touchable, right? Like that, you know, maybe I can't review my relationships, like it's too painful, or maybe I really, I don't know how to access the existential and I'm not interested in it, right? Like that's all okay too. There isn't a like supposed to or a need to. And I think sometimes for those of us that are interested in thinking about this and preparing for it, that can kind of build expectations of what happens or what is possible. And in that spirit of like tending to it as it happens, it also has a life of its own, and some things come up and some things don't come up, and part of the ask is to like just be with what is. Which can be really hard as a caregiver, right? Or as like a, you know, a person who it's not happening to your body, but it's very much happening in your life, and you may hope for certain types of revelations or connections or process that just don't happen because they don't happen.
Yeah, I think probably as a caregiver, it's even more glaringly challenging because your focus is on that, on trying to make something right, to make it good, to provide a beautiful death for someone, to have them not be in pain or suffering, or you know, tie up all their loose ends. And wouldn't it be great if they just talked to their daughter one more time, or you know, took that dose of morphine because they're really struggling. And these practices that we, you know, try to work on ourselves around tracking ourselves, responding to our own emotions and sensations, and allowing people to become who they are fully, is so hard in this moment because of our desire to tend to the well-being of somebody else. And it's completely logical, and it's not like anything wrong is going to happen, which is another thing that I remember saying to families at you know, the Zen Hospice Project, where there would be this sort of expectation that you know, you should do everything right, and you should know exactly when to leave the bed or when not to leave the bed, and be just the right sounds and all the right smells and all of these things, or you shouldn't bother somebody too much. And I was like, you know what, just be with them. Just do what, if you wake up at 2 a.m. and you feel like you need to be by your loved one's side, go and do it, because this is your time to be with them. And if somebody gets upset, then that's also like, let people get upset, you know, like this is a moment where we can allow the full range of our human capacity, which includes discomfort. So,
and also the mundane, right? That like in a topic that's so big that sort of holds all the things and the most existential of things, like it's also just real life, and it's filled with like beauty and annoyance and frustration and ease and all of the things. One of the things that you said made me think about how many times I've counseled families who are really sort of like sitting vigil, right? Like not leaving the bedside, that like, you know, there's a big element of this process that's out of our control. And it could be the 4 minutes that you spend going to the bathroom, that is the time that person dies. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't go to the bathroom, or that you did something wrong.
Yeah.
And we can't control the stories that people make of that after the fact, but just, how do we tend love on that part of this that is so out of our control?
Yeah, and actually on that, I think COVID, the last 2 years of the COVID experience really brought that home again. I was thinking back when I was younger, before computers and cell phones and all of the ways that we can connect, virtually now, which we didn't have at all, right? If family was in Europe, I had to wait for a letter to come.
Yeah.
Or
I mean, we had the technology 2 years ago and didn't use it.
Right. But this idea that we can somehow, that's what our connection is through virtual connection, but to also remember that, this is a little more on the existential end. So anyone who's been on a call with me before knows I can go down that path, but that we are connected. And these are some of the core issues that come up as we're approaching the end of our life or the end of someone's life that we love.
Mm-hmm.
Are we connected? Do they know that, that I love them? How can I show that, like all of those ways about trusting the connection and trusting that if somebody dies when you're not there, that there was still a connection there, that you somehow didn't abandon them or they abandoned you or you did something wrong or that your entire life connection didn't have meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And there are ways that we just sort of lump everything into our ability to control external actions. So when I think about that and the core issues, that's one of the primary ones to me is, did my life have meaning? Does your life have meaning?
Yeah.
Did people understand me? What is the legacy you want to leave?
Mm-hmm.
I went through, I had the privilege to attend training through the Conscious Dying Institute, and they really outline a lot of these areas really beautifully in 5 domains, which I think about as these core issues: the spiritual, the emotional, the mental, the physical, and the practical.
Yeah.
And in each one, they offer you some inquiries and questions to consider about how to think about what are the real things that you want to be tending to as you die. And that one of them is, does my life have meaning? Why was I here?
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen to me afterwards? Where am I going? Any of those belief systems that we had or didn't have, or that changed throughout our lifetime. Some folks had, deep, strong, profound spiritual connection and then maybe lost that or changed their minds and then are reconciling what that means and how to sit with that. And is it okay to just be a human in the mess of humanness and not have any answers and leave your body and leave this planet? Those are the core issues. The smaller ones are the things of like, who's going to get, my couch, where my photo is going to go. The belongings can matter to different degrees, bearing on how you're connected to people. I can speak for myself that it has sometimes been challenging to think about that because I don't have children.
Mm-hmm.
And my nephew is going to be someone who he's disabled, and so he probably won't be somebody who's going to have a house and his own children and be the keeper of my belongings. And so as I started thinking about that, it was like, yeah, it's not just a guarantee that my pictures are going to go to my family who are going to hold those memories and honor them. Maybe there's a friend out there, or does my life matter? Do my photos matter? Who would actually want them? And that contemplation of my life mattering was really big. So those tend to be the distracting core issues that come up as we're preparing. And then the other pieces around the physical and the practical, where do you want to die? Where can you die? Who would you like to be there? Those can fall into line a lot easier when some of those other core issues aren't weighing on us so heavily.
Yeah, I think, my social worker mind and orientation is also just thinking about how many logistics there are in the management of this time, right? Like that there is just a reality to how we manage this or how it's managed for us. And the logistics and the weight of physical caregiving can just be so loud that sometimes the rest of it just feels totally impossible. And I say that to normalize it, that it could, that the real raw physicality
Mhm.
of this and logistical and financial reality of this can be too loud
Yeah.
sometimes. And
Yeah.
I think that's a societal issue that we need to address, but is a common experience. And we'll talk a little bit more later when we talk about hospice and other sort of resources that can be really useful, that hopefully help to soften or to help with that lift. And then the other thing, just not everyone can sit in their deathbed and say authentically that they felt like they had a meaningful life, or that they felt like they had good connections, or that they can access reflection that leaves them feeling good.
Mhm.
And I would certainly be interested in because I know you have so much experience, Ladybird, just like as a caregiver or companion, like how do you sit with that? What do you do when the person can't say, yeah, I felt so connected, I did this, I felt meaning here? What path do you take when you come across that?
It's an interesting question. And it's I feel very almost sad. I'm like emotional. I mean, there's crying a lot. I've cried a lot
Yeah.
with people as they are reflecting on their lives. And also at times people can say, I wasn't connected, and that's just how it was. I mean, it's not even always
Right, it's
a
not
big
bad.
deal.
Yeah.
I think it's the capacity to sit with grief and suffering and messiness, right? And be uncomfortable
Yeah.
is one of the gifts that I know in speaking to people who are dying that they appreciate, which is, as that veil starts to shift and you start to actually leave and you're starting to die, and your connection to the world starts to change, there's such a pull to stay. Everyone around you is pulling you back to their reality because it's the only one that we know how to relate from. So it's totally logical. It's not like a good or a bad thing, but we're constantly checking in. How are you doing? How are you feeling? Relate to me in the ways that I know how to relate. And they're
and
going
and give me information that tells me how to help, tells me how to do, tells me how to be useful here.
right. So those places, there are a lot of places around uh, where it's such an individual experience, and to be able to sit with someone in their experience and be wherever they're at with it. So to your point about someone who maybe has a lot of grief around not being connected, or not feeling like they were the parent they wanted to be, or the child that they wanted to be, or anything, to not try to fix it or say, oh, don't worry, I'm sure they're fine. You
I
did a
mean, that
great
feels
job.
like highlight in all the neon colors, right? Like we can't fix these things for people. We can't even make them okay.
Yeah.
But we can, in that moment, offer love and connection, and maybe part of the experience they didn't get to have for whatever reason. And maybe they're receptive to that or not. But in ourselves, I feel like part of it's just like, again, this practice of being with what is, not feeling like I have to do something about it, but actually just like hold it with the person
and see them. When I think about the words that I've heard people say, even not when they're dying, but like even just in supporting somebody, and somebody really feels seen. That goes back to that core issue of like, did I even exist? Like, am I here on the planet? Is anybody noticing me? Did anybody see me?
Yeah.
And that's a really different experience than you heard me. You did what I asked.
Right.
That's different than like, oh my gosh, you're really sitting with me and you really see me.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are the deeper places again, which kind of steer you away from the practical ones that you were mentioning, like that are real. Like, do you have a hospital bed? Like, how are you getting to the bathroom? I mean, there's so many practical elements to tend to as you are losing the capacity to care for yourself.
Yeah. I see that we have a hand.
Yes, Bridget, perfect timing. I was just going to say that. So if we want to, I'm going to head over here. Juan, I'm just going to unmute you.
Hi, Juan. Nice to be with you.
Welcome.
It may take a second. You might have to unmute on your end. There we go.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, welcome.
I'm having lunch right now, so I'm ashamed a little bit to turn on my camera, but I love what you're saying. I really am. I have really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. Do you have something to add to the conversation? I'd love to hear from you. What brought you
No,
today?
I'm a palliative care doctor. I'm in Colombia. And well, social media. I found the event, and I really just like to have these spaces, like to hear, especially, and that's it basically. Um, I'm always curious to learn, to know a little bit more about how other people manage like these these moments, and to be a little bit better for my patients. Um, let me try to see if I can turn on my camera so I can say hi. But I
Might not be able to just because of how the webinar is set
Right,
up. Sorry, Juan. It's more of a webinar restriction than anything else.
oh, okay, great.
Yeah,
Great.
but thank you so much for joining from Colombia. That's fantastic.
No, thank you for everything that you're sharing, and I'll share a little bit of my thoughts. But let me give me a moment. I'm still thinking of everything that you're saying.
Great. Well, we'll just keep going, and then if something comes to your mind or a question comes to your mind, we'll come back to you a little bit later.
Yeah.
I'll sure do. Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy your lunch.
So great. Oh, which is another element too, the cultural differences. You know, there's so many elements to consider.
Yeah. And just a reminder, right, that like this is happening in the context of someone's life, and that includes their culture, that includes their birth order, that includes their life experiences. All of those things go to inform what feels important and possible at this time.
Yeah, and finding a way to discern that. I know the culture I teach, one of the roles I have is teaching prisoners at San Quentin how to take care of each other at the end of life. And the old models of training, especially cultural awareness, Bridget, I mean, you would have gone through this as well, was to, instead of ask people what is important to them, we go to like a sociology class, or we go find something online and we learn about, oh, this is what you know, Lakota people want at the end of life, and then we come to that person with this information behind us as though that's what they need. And there's certainly some I appreciate the respect of learning about other cultures, you know, on your own and tending to that. But there's also, again, that place of like just meeting the person where they are. Who are you? They might not have anything relative, you know, related to what you might read about a culture, and to really start learning about cultures by talking to people and talking to the people that know them if that person can't speak, and not making assumptions based on other stories or just reading about cultures. So
yeah, I think the other thing that sort of pulls on for me is like, for those of us in this space as caregivers, albeit professional or familial or communal, like so much of the work is unpacking our own assumptions, our own bias, our own stories about what this is supposed to be like what's important, you know, like it's important for me to recognize as a social worker, I'm like, okay, but can we get the logistical things like in order to open up this space for other things, right? Like that's my bias, that's my life informing that orientation, and I need to be mindful to not put that on other people. Hardest to do that when it's your own family member, right? To sit with my father and to not put on him what I think should be happening or what is right or what would be good, requires a lot of work, because it's a thing, you know, it's this great universal that we all will come to. And so we all have a relationship to it. We don't get to separate from it in that way. And so to not come with assumptions based on our own biases, or at least be able to call it out and say like, hey, this is just coming up for me. Maybe it doesn't land for you.
Yeah. So Bridget, with your social work hat on, what, you know, how would, when you see a good death, like, what does that mean to you? And how do you negotiate that with your clients?
Yeah. I mean, I have a very, 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 very strong aversion to the concept of a good death. I mean, even as a parent, I try not to do like too much good, bad stuff, right? Like I try to really kind of keep those words out of how we talk about our experience and our life and our behavior, or my child's behavior, because I feel like it sets up expectations around a lot of things that we can't control. And it's so subjective, that the conceptualizing a good death just feels like it includes like a lot of projection. So anyways, I kind of stay away from the concept of a good death. But for me, what I feel like my job is in meeting someone is to understand what's important for them. What are the North Stars in their experience? Like, it is really important to them that they see their grandchildren. It is really important to them that they be in their home. It's really important to them that they not be in their home, because they want their family to go on living in that space without the imprint of their dying there. It's important that certain prayers are read, right? Like that my job is to really learn for this person in front of me what speaks to them, what is possible for them, what it means, what's important to them, and holding the truth that those things, we can identify those things. We can identify like, it's important for me to be at home, and that still may not be possible. And a meaningful death, a supported death, a comforted death could still be possible. So really rambly roundabout answer to say like, what's important to the person in front of me. Yeah. What about you? What do you think about a good death?
Well, I similar to you, I try to not think of a good death, because it's so, I mean, it's just impossible to decide what a good death is. And usually what that means is that people felt comfortable and everybody around felt comfortable, and there was a lot of ease and grace. And so I think about good and ease, and what does ease mean, and how does that, what that imprint is on us. And when I think of what would technically be called a bad death, is the imprint that on those behind, right? Yeah. And so it's not so much a good or a bad death, but it's like, it's working with imprints, and how do we navigate how the world impacts us, right? Because in the bigger picture, death is death. And you know, I don't like, especially when you get into the realm, and this is another whole webinar, but in the realm of sudden deaths and young deaths and ways that we want to have answers and stories. I think a death that doesn't feel good is a death that doesn't have a storyline that we are comfortable with. So that's kind of more of the territory that I go with a good death, not so much like all the things were set up in the right way, but that the people behind can find a way to carry the story forward and not be in turmoil about it.
Yeah, we can get to Karen's question in one sec. I think the other thing that makes me think about is like, in our culture that's so like individualist and autonomy focused, right? The patient, the person who is ill, the person who's dying is like at the center of things, which great. I don't have an argument with that. But to your point, like the dying and the death goes on to live with the people that are still here.
Yeah.
Right. And so what are they seeing? What are they witnessing? And often uncontrolled pain or uncontrolled symptoms, the legacy of that goes to live with family members, right? Or caregivers or friends. And so access to a supportive team that can really help manage symptoms feels like central to this. The rest of it is very important, but if I had one sort of flag to put down, it would be like, yeah, people have the medical care and the symptom management that they need and want.
And the team, like to your, well, there's a question, but and I think there's a slide on that about like hospice again, like that we don't have to do this alone. I think that it comes down to that too, that we're not trying to navigate this yourself and figure everything out and get it all lined up and then make it all happen. That there's support.
Yeah.
Okay.
Karen, thanks for waiting.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. One sec, let me unmute you.
Thank you for the webinar. I'm a stage 4 metastatic lung cancer patient with Norris Cotton Cancer Center in Lebanon, New Hampshire, and they're very good. I'm with a terrific oncologist. I resisted their referral to palliative care, and then I accepted the referral, and I've met with palliative care, and I feel that in a way that check mark has been noted. So my care team has expanded. And what I'm struggling with, or trying not to struggle with, is the notion that I still hope, I still have that installation of hope that maybe I can be one of the 6% that gets to thread that needle and add years with terrific advances in immunotherapy and so on. So here I am, a year into treatment, and I understand palliative care is not hospice care. And at the same time, I know it's not too soon for me to maybe peek at hospice care and peek at what my death may look like and the ramifications it may have for people I love. And what I'm finding is that I will say I've read Dr. Miller's book, A Beginner's Guide, to the end. And as I got toward the end of the book, I thought, wait a minute, I don't need to finish this book because I won't be the caregiver who is left holding the death bag, if I can say that. My husband is actually by my side. And if I have a question, I'm trying to give up literally my extended arm with a palm up, compartmentalizing, saying, I'm not going to deal with my existential grip until I am pushed from behind. And yet, I want to live my life, and palliative care, I think I get it, but I don't get the continuum sometimes. I feel like as a cancer patient, somehow we get suspended between the notion of health and cancer and palliative care and hospice, and we kind of bump along those 4 prongs. And when I'm in that turmoil, I'm not living my life. So I'll mute again, but I think if I have a question, it's so fundamental that my husband and I, who have been just soulmates and in every way just joined, that this darn conversation, it's the first time there has been a splitting, that we're being called on to go to our corners and look across the room at each other. And the conversation is no longer one conversation, but we have to have it. Okay, thanks.
I mean, what a beautiful description of what is asked or demanded or possible. It really is like, it makes me think of that phrase, together alone, right? Like it's really something that we can look at and hold together, but separately, because it exists so differently for each of us, depending on if it's our body doing the illness and the dying or not. And I can only imagine what it is to feel like you and your husband are being called to imagine different futures, separate futures for the first time.
Yeah.
And I would say, I think you're doing the work, you know, like this is the existential conversation, to be able to name what you just named and to speak to it so, you know, really and beautifully, like that is it. Maybe it goes somewhere else too, but you're doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Karen, thank you. Thank you for articulating so beautifully the transitions that you've been going through and walking through. And to Bridget's comment about that together alone, this is that place. It's so hard for us to wrap, as humans, to wrap our brains around this notion of together alone. I mean, even in the soul connection that you've had with your husband, and that is real, and you're also individuals, that's always been real as well. Sometimes those things are not as obvious and they have different edges, and when it feels easy, we believe it, and when it doesn't feel easy, we don't believe it anymore. But even in across the room, the different corners, the different experiences, that connection is still there. And that's back to that place of resting in the connection, which you clearly have. You've been together for, I don't know how many years, but probably quite a few. And there, you have already been doing that. You have rested in the knowing that you're connected. And so continue to rest back in that, right? Like, and the grief of it, right? This is that place where it's the both and, that experiencing life, like you said, you're not experiencing life when you're in that actually is experiencing life. It's the part of experiencing life that just isn't very enjoyable, and it's annoying and frustrating and hard and exhausting, but we're still in our lives experiencing that. And it's not easy to hold suffering with as much compassion as joy. But you know, what I have come to understand is, when I think about, I hate the word evolving or consciousness, but like when coming to a place of realizing, oh, this is what life is. It's not that I'm just happy all the time. Your husband will never be ready to let go of you. That's not a requirement in this conversation. And so, yeah, it's just, it's a profoundly challenging time. And to your other question about palliative care and that continuum and the liminal space that people with cancer and chronic illness, that, like where do you operate that? Palliative care is this support that is just ongoing, and hospice care is palliative care. They just have a focus that they are now moving with you towards your end of life. But plenty of people, to your point about the 6%, graduate from hospice. There isn't a definite endpoint for everyone in the same way for every story, just because you have a team of hospice caregivers or the team of palliative care. Ideally, you have a team, and ideally you feel supported, that you can ask the questions, you can get the support that you need to figure out where you are on that path. And that's how I imagine hospice care, not so much an endpoint, but as like a more focused team of people supporting you around your physical, practical needs and emotional too. So sorry, long answer. We both kind of got, I'm just so taken by your, what you shared, Karen. Thank you. It's really, sure other people listening could relate.
Yeah. I also really appreciate your use of the word peak, because I think it's just so right and appropriate, which is like, yeah, you peak. Like maybe you read the first page of something, or you think about it for a second and then you close it back down, right? Like we all can look at this in different amounts, you know, ever, but certainly at a given time. And it's a big ask, right? To do that dance of hoping for more and being prepared for what might happen. Like that is a huge thing to hold. And there's just such sweetness to like, oh, I'm just gonna like peer, and then I'm gonna step back when it's too much. And what beautiful listening to yourself. Like you don't have to like open the book and then just like sit in it when it doesn't feel good anymore. Like, you know, get out of there. For some people, that's just like turning the TV on. Like there is no bad coping when it comes to like, I can't look at this anymore. This isn't helping me feel connected to my life. This isn't helping me feel connected to my husband. This is just making me feel overwhelmed and scared and disconnected. Great. Unpeak in the ways that you can once you've looked a little.
Yeah.
Okay, should we see what else we've said we can talk about?
No, we were going to talk about a totally different topic, like moving to the very practical. Get your social work hat on, Bridget.
Yeah. I think part of what we wanted to talk about location of death is because it can be really helpful to think about other logistical things and what kinds of supports and what things are possible. But often this can be a sort of like entryway for thinking about dying, which is like, where do you imagine that happening? You know, are you in your home? Are you definitely not? Are you surrounded by people that you love? Are you alone? You know, is there nobody that you can imagine having there, but you really want somebody, right? Like, so just kind of starting to like, could you picture it? Again, not an exercise for everyone, but if this question speaks to you, sort of where would you want to be, it can be a helpful thing to have defined when you do get to the place where you have to start thinking about logistics. And it can be a really, really helpful North Star for the folks in your life to try and organize things around you.
Yeah, and that's where the team comes back in, because it might seem like, oh, well, that's impossible. I'm not going to be able to afford that place, or I'm not going to be able to get to that location. And then somebody has a way to figure it out. They reach out to somebody who, you know, has the means to maybe help you get to that dream. So it's, if you have a dream, if you have a thought or a desire and you articulate it, that's like the first step to actually allowing something to be created and to allow the support to happen. And I think that's one of the other things I have experienced a lot of, is the ability to receive support, the ability to not the ability, but like that experience of feeling like you're a burden, as opposed to that people want to care for you. You know, I think about all the many things that we created as an hospice project, or even just in hospice at homes. And sometimes to me, seemingly like a small ask, or huge asks for people, because they really didn't want to bother. They didn't want anyone to feel like it was putting them out or costing money or stressful, but there was actually quite a bit of joy for everybody around trying to figure out like, how can we even get close to this idea for them? So yeah, it's definitely a North Star in that sense. And the sooner you recognize it, we can also start working with the tendrils of like, well, and what if it didn't happen? One of the exercises I used to do with folks is to kind of figure out, like, if they're writing their advance directives, like what they want, how they want it. They want some people are very specific. They know exactly what music they want. They, you know, they've really done a lot of thought about this. And then to say, now let it all go. Because if none of those things can happen and your caregivers are so concerned about making sure that happens, it would be great for them to know that that's your preference and they trust you to do what you're going to do, and but that it was really fun to just have an idea about it.
Mhm.
So there's kind of different ways.
Yeah, I think, you know, the hospice movement in this country in the late 70s and early 80s really like kind of put its line in the sand around, you know, death at home being preferable, and the majority of people wanting that, but not really being able to access that. And I think some people still say that most people want to die at home. I feel like that data might be like a little bit dated. And I feel like if there's anything you hear from us today, meaningful deaths, supported deaths, deaths where symptoms are managed can happen in a lot of places. The hospital is not a bad place. It may be for you, and that would be good to know, but you are not meeting in us people who think that this should be happening somewhere specific or that home is better. It's if it's better for you, and lots of good things can happen in lots of places.
Yeah, and in fact, there are some beautiful deaths that happen in hospitals. And to your point, Bridget, again, like there's been a lot of sort of compartmentalizing, and this is good and this is bad. But I think about the millions of healthcare workers out there in a very stressful system, and the majority of the healthcare workers that I have come into contact with want to offer the best care that they can to somebody who is dying in the hospital. And so to kind of hold that in your heart and your mind somewhere, that there are lots of really beautiful people out there in the world that will surprise you.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about time. So we have 7 minutes.
Oh, is that it?
Yeah.
We'll go to the last slide.
We could talk a lot about hospice logistics, but I don't want us to do that unless that's like really a sort of call from this group. And so
check on questions. Are there
yeah, maybe we can just sort of like open the space to more questions, and if nothing comes, we can definitely keep talking, but I want to make sure that we hear from you all if you have thoughts or reflections or questions specifically about palliative care, specifically about hospice, about anything we've said today.
Yeah, I can just say to everyone, if anyone has a question that's specific to hospice, why don't you go ahead and put it in the Q&A section, and you guys, if you want to head to the kind of whose reality concept is it, and then if we do have a question, we can head to it after.
Sure.
Great.
Yeah.
And I saw Juan unmuted. I don't know, Juan, were you ready to say something? And there's
Oh, you know what? We do have a hand up. Let me,
okay.
Deb, 1 second here. Hey, Deb.
Hi.
Hi, Deb.
I guess I have a question because I've been a hospice volunteer and I've been with people. I did my training back in 1989, but now I'm entering this for real from myself here now. So it's very different being on this end of it. And one of the things that's happening for me is just that I'm really wanting to be quiet and deep and really experience this. And I'm feeling extremely overwhelmed by, I hate to say it like that because I'm so grateful for the friends and support that I have, but I don't know really how to make space that way in a way that feels as respectful and generous and open-hearted as I want to be to everyone. But I feel a little bit that I keep on having the vision of like, I've had dogs before that like towards the end, they just want to be in the woods and want to be left alone. And I'm a very, very spiritual, deep person. And yeah, so if you could speak to that of how to honor that need without offending others, and how I might be able to do that with as much grace as I possibly could. Thank you.
Yeah, that was very gracefully.
I know. I was going to say
that was beautifully graceful.
I don't know how you could do anything ungraceful. I mean, you're a human, so I'm sure it's possible. But, you know, the way in which you just explained where you're at and what is true for you, I mean, is deeply moving to me. I think I think the hard part is we don't control whether or not we offend people. You know, like what we could practice and rehearse and like have the perfect thing to say in the gentlest way, and someone could still be like very hurt by it because it doesn't match what they're hoping for, what they're needing. And like,
Yeah, thank you.
so much love to them in that. And like, this is your experience, and you get to, if you want, draw the boundaries that help to create the container that you need. And then the other person's journey is to live with that, you know.
Yeah.
Also,
Yeah, thank you.
finding gatekeepers, Deb. I mean, this again, sometimes it's easier said than done, but if there is one person in your life that that you feel quite connected to, that can start to become a voice for you, and you know, I say gatekeeper, but that's the person that then is sort of the manager of your time, and people can check in with that person versus having to check in with you. And you can make that really clear, beautiful statement like, I'm going in, I'm needing more personal space, this is where I'm at, so and so is going to be responding to all of, anytime you are interested, I love you. I want to know that you're thinking about me, and this person will be letting me know, and they're going to be doing that. So that I really have seen gatekeepers as tremendously supportive of you being able to hold your space sacredly.
And I think if there were people that you were, you know, more worried about how they were going to sort of take this boundary or this need of yours over time, give them that job, right? That's a really meaningful role for them to play. So if you're more worried about somebody over another person, then like have them help you with that.
Right, that's a beautiful idea. Yeah, thank you.
And I hope you just like hear and feel validated, that this is like a perfectly reasonable thing to need and want. And, you know, this speaks to, you know, my moment in life and maybe my own kick that I'm on right now, but like, would we demand a woman in labor or a person in labor like talk to us because we think it's important, because it's like meaningful to us? Like, no, we would like give her the space to like go and be in a dark room if she had access to that, right? So like, you know, it's again just the cultural story is about what we feel entitled to and what transitions, and there is an animal instinct to like close it down.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much. It's really, I feel very validated, and I have some great tools here. And I guess I have to like have it tattooed on my arm that I don't have to get this perfect for everybody else around me too.
No.
Yeah. So thank you for all of that.
We'll happily remind you, Deb.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, that was
hand raised, no? Or is it over?
I think that was just Deb's hand. It's
right at 11.
Yeah, it's 11, so we can be respectful of people's time, or if you guys have a few more minutes, we can kind of talk about reality. But that was also, I think, a beautiful way to end if you guys want to. Up to you.
Yeah, I mean, Deb may have just most perfectly highlighted whose reality is it for us.
Yeah.
Which was like theme that we talked about a few weeks ago too, which is that like it's a lot of realities at once. And we have this like profound job to try and hold all of that simultaneously, and then recognize what we can't hold and to come back to our own experience. And that's true as a caregiver also, right? So much focus is outward on who we're caring for, and it has to be. And at a certain point, it's also, there's the, you know, it can be useful to come back and separately sort of tend to what's happening for us.
Yeah, and that moment, every moment changes. You know, I share that with caregivers and people in their own journeys with their death, is that one morning might feel so different than the next, and you might need to really just be in and feel like, that's it, I'm not talking to anybody again. And then 2 days later, you feel a little bit differently. So to really let each day be the day that you're in, and not make it project out into like a day, even the next hour. Just know, like, this is where I'm at right now, and it will change.
Yeah.
So, well,
Thank you so much, everyone. Lovely to be with you as always, and we'll look forward to more.
Yeah, thanks everyone for spending your Friday morning with us. We hope everyone has a good weekend. Thank you, Ladybird. Thank you, Bridget.
Bridget,
of
thank you
course.
for having us. Bye.
Bye.